All right, welcome back. I hope the workshops were useful and very interesting. So to make his way back up to the lectern, can you please welcome Russell Bishop again?
Kia ora no tātou anō. Pai rawa ki te a koutou te ahi hei neo ro reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou tēnā tātou. Well, it's an unusual experience to have the opportunity of doing two keynote addresses at one conference. And if you want to blame anybody, it's Iqbal Singh's idea, actually. And it's interesting that he's not here. So, anyway, we'll do it. What I've been thinking a lot since I spoke with you yesterday, and what's been really interesting is that I've been to quite a few sessions, and I've tried to get in and out of a few other sessions, and I've sat through some and popped in and out of a few others. And what's been really interesting is that people seem to have got the message from the Stronger Smarter Institute of the need to focus on anti-deficit explanations, agentic explanations for children's performance, Indigenous children's performance, and also the message about the need for high expectations and relationships based upon that seems to be very, very clear, and that's magnificent. What I'm going to do this afternoon is talk a bit about something which I'm getting a message is something that is sort of like the where to from here, and I hope this might be useful for you in this quest of where to from here. It's not that I'm not hearing it happening at this summit, it's just that maybe I can give you a coherent framework to hang it upon. And so what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is where to from here, in particular looking at the use of evidence, not data as the board out the side says. I'm not going to look particularly at data because data is only one form of evidence, but I'm going to look at seven sets of evidence that groups in schools can use to promote the educational improvement and advancement for Indigenous students. The first one, I'm going to rehearse what I talked about yesterday very briefly, is the community and student stories as evidence, the aspirations of community groups and children, and the preferences and practices that they would state that they would have for their education, and how important that was for building effective pedagogies. The second thing I'll be talking about is, so what happens when what's called ETP, or the effective teaching profile that we built based upon students' experiences of education and their families and their teachers and their principals' experiences, what happens when it's implemented? And I'll be looking at there in particular at the impact of improving relationships. Then the third set of evidence, we'll be looking at developing a structure to use teacher and student evidence, and I've got a short movie there of the sort of work that we do in the Kotahitanga project in New Zealand, which looks at the sort of activities that coaches have to engage in to support teachers to change their practice in a sustained manner. And I'll be talking about the importance of having people whose job it is to do this work in the schools. It's not good enough to tack it on to the back of somebody who's already overloaded with work, some poor deputy principal who's already flogging away. Don't just tack it on to them. Don't just tack it on to somebody else. It's important that it actually becomes a specific task. I'll be looking at the inquiry cycle using student evidence to inform your practice, formative assessment in other words. And I'll be looking at what do effective teachers do, and our evidence for what they do when they use evidence of student performance. I'll be looking at the evidence of the value of maintaining the quality of the implementation. We're far enough down the road now in our projects, we've been going for 12 years, to see that if schools who implement the program effectively see higher gains in national standardised examinations than schools that don't implement things properly. So it's very encouraging results there for those schools who do actually follow through and implement things properly and don't just pay lip service. And then the last one is I've got another movie looking at a school, Te Puke High School in the Bay of Plenty of New Zealand, where they are using evidence of student performance to change their whole school. As I said yesterday, whatever we deal with, I was dealing with community relationships yesterday. Today I'm just talking about the use of evidence, but it's actually one part of 7 dimensions of change. In particular, the change that instructional leaders, or I think in New Zealand we call them pedagogic leaders, the leadership, the changing leadership of school that's distributed throughout schools, whether they be the principal, deputy principals, or heads of subject areas or pastoral care folk. It's the work that these leaders have to do in the school to bring about change through supporting their teachers so they can bring about the necessary change in the classroom. Because the classroom is the central place in a schooling system where change is going to take place. So the first thing that the instructional leaders need to do is to ensure that they target Indigenous students in their school's vision and goals. And remember, I always like the difference between a vision and a goal is that Martin Luther King didn't have a strategic plan. He had a vision. And it's really important that we actually do have visions, that we can see the far horizon, where we want to go. Because I'll be talking about that a little bit later too. The second point is that pedagogic leaders need to support the school's teaching and learning programs. And we know from Viviane Robinson's work in leadership and best effort and synthesis analysis of what goes on in changing leadership, we know that the closer the leaders get to the actual action, the better the results. Pedagogic instructional leaders also need to change the school's organisational structures, the policies and processes. For example, if streaming or tracking is limiting the progress, if you've got a white top and a brown or a black bottom, then you need to do something about that, because it will be impacting, because we know from John Hattie's work that teachers actually teach differently to high stream classes than they do to low stream classes. They tend to use remedial programs and remedial actions and more transmission mode education in low stream classes than they do with high stream classes. And if your bottom streams are all full of Aboriginal kids, they're going to get teaching strategies that we know are ineffective. Leadership, the distributed leadership as I talked about. The spread, who's included in the reform? Yesterday I was talking about communities, aspirations, experiences driving this approach. Also, who else is included in the reform? Right through to the system level leaders who are most important to be included in the reform. We're finding this very much the case in New Zealand at the moment, that our system level leaders are heading off on a different track than we are, and they're theoretically driven somewhere else, and unfortunately they're taking their money with them in another direction. And unfortunately it'll take some time for them to realise that direction is unproductive, because our country's been down that direction quite a while, quite a number of times and over the last few years. Politicians have very short memories, you may be aware of. You may have come across that experience. They tend to have memories that last for about 3 years. Is that right? And beyond that's blank. There's nullus, terra nullis, I think is an Australian term. No, it's not. It's an English term for Australia, isn't it? Evidence. One of the major functions of pedagogic leaders is to make sure that they have data management systems in the schools so that schools can use the evidence, the great plethora of evidence and data that we produce in schools, there's a tsunami of the stuff coming out of schools all the time, but what we tend to use it for is summative purposes. What we're talking about here is using the data to inform our practice, the formative purposes of data and evidence. And ownership. The last point is about your school's commitment to its goals. Now, as you can imagine, I could do a keynote address on each one of those, but I won't, because we're all going home tomorrow with a bit of luck. So I'm just going to talk about, I've talked about spread, and I'm going to talk about evidence, and of course I'm going to talk about pedagogy, because as I keep saying, pedagogy is the one that makes the difference. That's the place where you start the rubber hits the road, as they say. Right. You want to read more about this? Advertising break. There's a book called Scaling Up Education Reform, which myself and two other colleagues wrote in 2010, and that covers those 7 dimensions of change in educational reform. Now, first use of evidence can be used to develop effective teaching approaches. And I said yesterday that we commence by talking with Māori parents, the families, the children, the teachers and their principals, asking them 2 simple questions. So what's the issue, what's the problem, what's the limitation, what's holding Māori kids back, what's the experiences of these folk? And the second question was, so what does it all mean? What's your theorising, what's your explanation? Because it's very important to actually find other people's explanations rather than your own. Because all you do with that approach is keep confirming your own opinion. So we went out there trying to find other people's opinions on the matter. And basically I showed you what they told us yesterday in terms of the deficit notions that teachers were predominantly ascribing to. And however, what we did find, particularly from talking with young Māori students and their families, we found that they were able to tell us about what we've since called an effective teaching profile. Now, it's made up of 2 ideas, and the major idea of this is that teachers need to understand the importance of anti-deficit theorising and agentic thinking. Agentic meaning I am an agent of change. I am able to make changes to the outcomes for these children. I'm able to do something about the problems I see in front of me. There are problems, but they are not the fault of the kids. And they're not my fault either. But I am a person who's able to do something. So that is very fundamentally important, that understanding. The second major feature of the effective teaching profile is that teachers are encouraged and supported to develop caring relationships with young people. Again, it's the message from Stronger, Smarter Institute. And in our case, it's made up of 3 dimensions. That is caring for the young people as Indigenous. And people ask me, well, so what does that mean? Well, the best way for that to be defined is to let the kids define it, because they'll let you know. Once you've created a relationship of trust, of forbearing, of experiences where they can be themselves in the classroom, and I'll explain more about this in a moment because it actually comes out as part of the pedagogy. In fact, I'd prefer to call this a pedagogy of relations as opposed to any other thing, is that young people can be themselves in the classroom. One of the things that Sean was talking last night, and he's going to talk again tonight, is whenever you go anywhere with a group of Indigenous people, there's lots of laughter. There's lots and lots of laughter and lots of jokes, lots and lots of crude jokes too. And great fun is had. And when you go into a classroom, what I find really alarming is when I go to a classroom full of Indigenous kids, it's dead quiet. Everybody's sitting in rows, everybody looking very serious as though someone's died or something. And I thought the point that Chris Sarah keeps making about the fact that schools must be pretty grim if going outside and kicking a drink can down the street is preferable. That's a pretty good image, really. And then the third thing is about teachers, that's the first thing. The second thing is about teachers having high expectations of the behaviour and of the performance and signalling that in their actions, not just going in and saying, I've got high expectations of you, but actually signalling it through your practice. And the third one is about managing a classroom, knowing what to do, knowing how to run a classroom in a way that is actually effective. The third major set of the effective teaching profile, is developing learning relationships in the classroom. And I'm going to spend a bit more time on that in this talk, because this is where I think maybe where you might like to go to. And that is developing dialogic interactions and also using a range of strategies, and then using formative assessment approaches. And these latter 3 are the sort of dialogic interactions that take place that create a learning relationship in the classroom, where young Māori children have told us that this is a place that I know I'm going to succeed and I'm going to be actually making a difference to my life. We've supported these ideas from the literature, of course, and we've also verified it by repeating the exercise in Canada. We've been working in Canada for the last 5 years. And we're finding exactly the same sort of circumstances exist, the same experience of the Indigenous kids over there. And we've also found that the effective teaching profile pretty much holds a lot of water in that circumstance as well. And we're also just finding now that as schools are implementing the effective teaching profile, albeit very similar to that which we developed in New Zealand, they're now finding Indigenous kids in band schools, that's community schools in Canada, are now starting to achieve to the level they would had never come across before. And so they've got whole classes full of kids who are doing very well in mathematics. They've got whole classes that are doing very well in literacy programs. And they've got whole classes of children that are staying on at school. And their attendance is increasing tremendously because the Indigenous kids there have the same issues with voting with their feet from uncomfortable circumstances. Now, in 2004 and 5, we did some experiment to see if is this actually, this effective teaching profile, is it holding water with the kids? Because I think the very first bit of evidence that we should keep thinking in our minds is not the NAPLAN data, it's not the test results data we've got, it's actually the kids' experiences. And I'm not just talking about have we got happy kids. I'm talking about, are we developing Aboriginal students, Indigenous students, as coherent, cogent, comfortable learners? Now, so there's two crosses on this. There's two axes on this indicator. The first one is about low teaching skills to high teaching skills. That's the sort of the second part of the effective teaching profile. That's the bit about interactions, it's a bit about using a range of strategies, and it's about using formative assessment approaches. The other axis is the caring axis. And when you put these together, we interviewed 300 or 400 students, and we said, so what's it like to be in the classrooms of people nowadays after you've been through a process? And they were able to identify 4 sorts of teachers for us. You've got the sort of teacher that demonstrates low caring and low teaching skills. And they said, we can't learn in that classroom. I don't think anybody can learn in those classrooms. We've then got a group of people that demonstrate high caring and yet low teaching. And this is a problematic group because this is the group of people that get the message about high expectations in relationships, but they don't think they've actually got to do anything beyond that. They think they can, just by being nice to kids and cutting them a bit of slack, that the kids actually make a bit of progress. The kids told us that those teachers, they don't learn in those classrooms. And in fact, they really find these classrooms very patronising. And they say things like, we're sitting in a class and we've got to write a paragraph or an essay, and we write a sentence and the teacher says, good boy, good girl. And the European kid next to them writes a paragraph and they say, good boy, good girl. So the kids feel belittled by this approach. The next group is the group who show low caring but have high teaching skills. And the kids said a bit to us about these people, yeah, they can teach very well, they've got all the latest strategies, they can do it all very well, but we don't think they care for us. They still treat us as though somehow we're a problem in the classroom and they don't want us in the classroom. So there's 3 out of 4 of the categories of teachers that the Māori kids told us they can't work with, they can't learn with. The teachers with whom they learn are the people who demonstrate high caring and the people who demonstrate high teaching skills. So it's a combination. It's not either or, it's and. Okay, second set of evidence. What happens when you implement this process? Well, here's courtesy of Dr. James Ledwig, who is at University of Newcastle. He's come over to New Zealand. He started working with a whole lot of our data we've got in our data system, a database that we've collected over years. And like all good quantitative people, he found it really exciting, and I found what he's produced to be even more exciting. And what it shows is that it's that crosshatch, if you like, that the children talked about. And it's got there in the horizontal axis, you've got the measurement of relationships as defined by caring, expectations and management. You've got on the vertical axis, you've got a measure of discursive practices. That is, practices that we know are effective in improving all children's learning, and we know that really make a difference for Indigenous kids. And these are using kids' prior knowledge, providing feedback and feed forward to students, and best of all, co-constructing learning with students. Kids told us about this stuff when we interviewed them in 2001 and again in 2005 and again in 2007. They keep telling us the same things. They see saying, this is what makes a difference. When teachers do these things, we really start to learn. We really get a handle on stuff because we can engage on our own terms. And we've got ideas and we want to share them with other people. We want to co-construct, we want to collaborate in our thinking. They don't use the jargon that I'm using, but that's what they're talking about. And you'll see there's 3,500 dots, and the 3,500 dots are from 1,350 teachers from 33 secondary schools. And this was produced in 2009, and these are observations undertaken by trained facilitators. And what it shows us quite nicely is there's a 0.4 correlation between relationships and interactive dialogic pedagogies or strategies or interactions. Okay? And what's interesting about that is that it's an asymmetrical relationship. Now, Jim tells me that what that means is that relationships are foundational. That the relationship is foundational to the discursive practice. Now, you have a look at this graph, and what's really fascinating about it is that if you look at the upper left-hand corner, there's not one dot out of 3,500 dots in the upper left-hand corner. In other words, where teachers have low levels of relationships, demonstrated relationships with Indigenous children, they are not using, and I would suggest they're not able to use, the pedagogic interactions that we know make a difference for kids' learning. So therefore, what's absolutely vital is that we support teachers to improve the relationships they have with their children so that they can actually start to use those pedagogic interactions that we know make a difference for the learning of children. And then what happens is that then feeds back on and reinforces the relationship. But what's really interesting out of this is that it is actually the relationship that starts it. And the relationship that starts it is the non-deficit theorising of the teacher, because that's how you start a relationship. And again, the probability factor shows that relationships are foundational. Another one of the characteristics that we're looking at in our program is to see if we can improve student engagement, because we know that engagement is a very good predictor of long-term achievement. So, how's that working out? Again, relationships along the bottom, going from left to right, getting better as you go along to the right, and on the vertical axis, you've got a measure of student engagement. And again, there's a correlation between the two of them, and you'll notice that on the upper left-hand quarter, there is no or very few people who actually have interaction in that particular spot, meaning that if you have low levels of relationships, you're going to have you're not going to have high levels of engagement. And what's really great, in the bottom right-hand corner, you will notice that the people who have high levels of relationships with Indigenous children virtually have nobody not engaged, which is very encouraging for the message from Stronger, Smarter. But there's a catch to it. Oh, and again, the probability shows that it's asymmetrical. So therefore, again, relationships are foundational to the whatever you're measuring on the vertical axis. In this case, discursive practices, dialogic interactions, and engagement. Now, what happens with student achievement as people improve their relational interactions or developing caring and learning relationships with Indigenous students? And as you can see here, we've got 4 different groups of teachers categorised according to their placement along a continuum. And what's interesting is that up the left-hand side, you've got a measure, a norm reference standardised test measure for student achievement. And you can see here for all students, As the teachers become more proficient at improving their relationships, implementing relationships in a classroom, so Māori children's achievement on norm reference standardised tests, everybody else has to sit, all that stuff, because our kids can do what anybody else can, gets better. And the only thing that changes is the teacher and the teacher's pedagogy. The teacher doesn't have to undergo any great Maoist reinvention of anything, or they have to go off to sort of re-education camps or anything. Just got to change their practice, that's all. And their practice has got to be based upon changing the caring relationships they develop, which has got to be based upon how they understand their relationships to develop, based upon agentic and anti-deficit theorising. Māori students, being a resilient group of people, as soon as people start to get better, they make growth really rapidly. And the other good message out of this that you could all take notice of, take pleasure in, and that is, I heard yesterday 85% of Indigenous Aboriginal students are in mainstream schools in small proportions. That's the same as Māori kids in New Zealand. 94% of our kids are in mainstream secondary schools. Some have got big numbers, but quite a lot have got very small percentages of the population of the school of Māori. And so you're going to get the question as to why are we focusing upon Māori? What's the benefit of that? And they haven't got enough privileges. We get this one all the time. We keep saying, you mean the privilege of being in prison all the time and under, and welfare and those sort of things, and unemployment, those sort of privileges. They don't like the sarcasm though. I found that out. Remember at the airport, people don't like sarcasm. But look at this. As the teachers improve their ability to implement relational pedagogies, so too do Māori kids get better at achievement, and so do non-Māori students. So there's the key to it, folks. What's good for Māori, what's good for the Indigenous kids is good for everybody else. But we know from history that what's good for everybody else is not necessarily good for Māori and Aboriginal in Australia. Because if it was, it would have been, and we wouldn't have the problem. So we don't have to find that out again. We don't have to go back over 100 years and reinvent the wheel. We know that didn't work, but this does work. So make sure you get this off the website and show this to your staff and give them great comfort and saying, we're going to set a goal in our schools to improve the educational achievement of Aboriginal students. And when they say why, you're going to say, because it's good for them, and it's good for you, and it's good for everybody else. So no one's going to get hurt out of it. Oh, there's some effect sizes too, just in case there's some folk in the audience that like a few effect sizes. So effect sizes are the currency of the day in our country, and you can, I won't go into that. It'll be on the website if you want to have a look into it. But basically it shows that we're getting effect sizes that in Hattie's work would say that they are the results of excellent teaching, over 0.6, and you're getting, I talked about this yesterday, didn't I? Yeah. You're getting very high effect sizes there, and for both Māori and non-Māori. Evidence number 3. But I want to talk about a structure within the schools to support teachers and leaders to implement the effective teaching profile. And we do this by having a coached professional development cycle, which starts off with an introductory workshop, where people are introduced to the idea of actually working using the effective teaching profile. We then provide them with a series of observations and feedback sessions, the evidence of which is used to assist them to change their practice or to implement the effective teaching profile, because we know that that's what makes a difference. So we don't want them implementing other sorts of things, we don't want them going off on all sorts of other tracks, we want them implementing this stuff. And then the next thing we want them to do is to use collaborative co-construction meetings and follow-up shadow coaching sessions that are again facilitated by coaches who have been supported to learn how to do this material, this approach in the schools. And again, I'd suggest that it's really important that people have this particular skill, have this particular approach, and are able to actually make a difference in the schools. Now, the fourth set of evidence I'm going to talk about is that is an inquiry cycle approach, where I'm going to suggest that what teachers need to use is this approach, which comes from Helen Timperley in the Best Evidence Synthesis on Professional Learning and Development, and you can get access to this on the Best Evidence Synthesis Works website under Education Counts, the New Zealand Ministry of Education's website. And you'll see in the upper, where are we, left-hand corner, it starts with the notion of looking at what do students already know. Now, John Dewey was talking about this 100 years ago, so it's a shame it's taken a wee bit long to get into practice, but we're getting there. The Russians got into it quite effectively for a while there, but we've sort of got off on the wrong track, but we're getting back to it. So from there, you're leading to the cycle of what do teachers need to learn, and I'd suggest they need to learn about the effective teaching profile, because we know that's what makes the difference, and then what they need to start planning where they're going, they need to develop the teaching strategies, and then they need to do some form of gathering of evidence to see how well they're doing, which then leads on to the next, reinvents the cycle again. Here's some examples of evidence that you might work with. So it's not just data. And some of the responses, in the collaborative sessions, the coaches are trained to lead these sorts of questions. How might we demonstrate our caring for Indigenous students more effectively? How might we demonstrate our having high expectations for Indigenous students more effectively? So it's covering all of these areas. How might we improve our classroom school management to be more effective, and so on. Use prompt sheets, use directed learning. Directed instruction for teachers is a very effective way of doing things. We've produced big long prompt sheets with here's how to start a sentence to provide feedback to somebody. Here's the start of a whole lot of sentences that will help you provide feed forward to a whole lot of students, etc. How might we increase the use of our use of their prior knowledge? I want to come to that. That's really, really important, because I want to get into the notion of culture and being culturally responsive. How might we provide more effective feedback to teachers? Again, back to students, a feed forward. And Hattie's work shows that it's the other way around that really starts making some differences as well. How might we co-construct learning more effectively? What strategies can we use to create an effective learning context? What are we using? Can we use approaches like, and I heard some people yesterday talking about cooperative learning, narrative pedagogies. I'd advise you to look into that. Using stories for learning processes, and also generating students' questions is a very powerful way of getting people's culture to come into the classroom, because the whole idea behind a culturally responsive approach is that you can actually create a learning context in a classroom where people can bring their cultural understandings to the situation and not have it dominated by the teacher all the time. What evidence of performance am I looking for? What assessment activities and so on? Shadow coaching. I've explained that. I don't need to talk about that. Now, 6. What do effective culturally responsive teachers do? Okay, so the question comes up. Okay, so what do they do? What do these characters do? Well, the first thing, I've just got to hammer it again, Understand to explain things in terms of non-deficit thinking, non-deficit explanations, high expectations, all those sorts of things, caring, demonstrating caring, and creating context in classrooms where people can bring their own explanations to the conversation that is learning, to actually enter into a conversation that is learning and bring their own explanations to it, and be enabled to do that by the very context. Not to be allowed by the teacher, but that actually the context creates a wonderful way of doing this. I wish I had another half an hour, because I could show you some narrative pedagogic approaches and how you could actually get kids to ask questions based upon stories. And I've seen this happen in classrooms time and time again. You've had a whole group of silent students when the teacher's been asking all the questions, and as soon as the teacher stops asking questions and then asks one question and says, "What questions have you got from this story?" all of a sudden the kids have got 50 odd questions, and they're all higher level thinking questions. Teachers are always worried about low level thinking questions like, describe the physical environment of the rainforest, that sort of stuff. Whereas kids are always interested in the sort of questions about, why is the sky blue, for goodness sake? What do? They respond to parents' aspirations. Parents expect more than the restitution of a place for marginalised in the education system, more than just catching up, certainly more than remedial work. This is what I want to get your eyes. I want to suggest to get your eyes up on the horizon. I've been hearing people about sort of trying to get NAPLAN scores up or other scores up and trying to do better and this sort of thing. They will happen. They will happen. I'll give you a good example. One of the schools in our program has been in the program for 10 years. 7 years ago, Level 2 NCA, which was your Year 11 qualification, external examination, 29% of Maori children were getting that qualification at the school. Last year, 2011, 79% got it. In 2012, 86.7% got it. That's the same as the national average for non-Māori. But that took 10 years. It'll happen. If you keep going, it'll happen. You've got to keep going, that's the trick. But you've got to also do some things. So don't do the remedial work stuff. Get your eyes above the horizon. We expect our children to get the best that education has got to offer. Let me show you what I mean. Here's a young man I know very well. It's my youngest son, Sam. Now, you won't even begin to believe what job Sam does. Can you imagine the job that would keep his mother and myself awake at night, sitting up in bed thinking, oh my God, what's he doing now? No, he's not trafficking heroin to the United States or into Asia. No, he's not an explosive director. He's not even a school teacher. He's a blinking skydiver. And here's what he does. And he's down in Melbourne at the moment, learning to be a skydiver. And when I looked at the skills that he would need, I was thinking about this, I was trying to be objective. I was trying to get some sleep as well. And I was trying to say, so what skills does he need? And I thought, well, getting him to pack a parachute. He's got to know how to get out of a plane. He's got to know how to release his parachute. He's got to know what to do when there's a problem. And he's got to know, with his parachute that is, because he keeps telling me about the wires get caught up and oh my God. He's got to know how to land safely. He told me the other day when I was down in Melbourne talking to him and he said, I can land at 40 kilometres an hour now. Holy God. But he won't learn these things at school, will he? We don't have parachute courses at school, thank goodness. So what's he going to need to learn at school? What are the skydiving skills that he actually needs? This is what I want my boy to have. You think he's got 4 seconds from the time his parachute fails to open correctly till he hits the ground. He's got to do some remedial action pretty quickly. He's got to have some skills, hasn't he? Bit of curiosity and imagination is a good one. He's got to be able to ask questions. He's got to be able to work in teams. All those things that corporate people keep talking about. If we want our children to enter the corporate world, you ask the corporate world, what do you want skills? What skills do you want our children to have? Well, they've got to be able to work in teams. They've got to ask questions. They've got to be able to answer questions. They've got to be able to accept feedback. Have you ever thought about how difficult it is accepting feedback? What's the reaction when most of us get a bit of feedback on something we do? It's not, oh, thank you very much for that wonderful analysis of my activities. It's basically, who do you think you are? So we've got to be able to learn to accept things and everything. These are 21st century thinking skills, aren't they? That's what we want our kids to have. We want our kids to know, how do you get there? Culturally responsive teachers, use evidence of student performance, use a range of teaching strategies, cooperative learning, narrative pedagogy, I've told you about that too, and also dialogic interactions. This is the cup of tea I want to talk about briefly. I've got about 2 minutes. The aim is to reduce the use of traditional interactions such as instruction, monitoring, feedback behaviour, feed-forward behaviour. They're unproductive, unhelpful. And yet, 3 times we've studied this and we've found that 86% of everything teachers do fits into that category. And we know from what the kids tell us and what research tells us that kids don't learn in these circumstances because we can actually suffer about 8 minutes of direction. of instruction. And yet we continue to talk on and on and on, like I am. Increasing, as I said, the dialogic interactions, the prior knowledge, the feedback academic, the feed-forward academic, the building upon people's cultural understandings, allowing them to bring, or creating context where they can bring learning to the situation, where they can bring, I'll mention all this, I'll whip through. I just want to leave you with one last thing, and that is be wary of culture awareness additive courses for teachers. I haven't heard of anything happening at this course, at this conference, because every time I find those ones, I go along and put a big black mark on the door. Say, don't go into that room because you will be poisoned. Cultural awareness programs, because what you do is you get a whole lot of people defining what Aboriginality is or indigeneity is, and packaging it all up and selling it off for other people to use for their own purposes. And you get it centralised, you get it all sort of, squashed down for the purposes of other people, not for the purposes of the kids. The last bit of evidence I want to look at is, what do effective teachers sound like? Remember I told you yesterday what non-effective teachers sound like? This is what they sound like. I've had a look at the results this year. Now notice that everybody, flick your eye through this and you'll see that each one is using an evidence base for their decision making. Test results. The kids are asking more questions, better questions, higher level questions. Kids come up outside the classroom. They want to talk to me. Giving feed forward to the answer rather than being fobbed off would probably be a lot more effective. We identified a couple of strategies. We've learned as a group they respond well to lots of positive encouragement. One of the things, and so on and so forth, using various... So I kept pushing along, saying they're buying to what they were doing and the cognitive level of the lesson was right. More evidence about the cognitive level of the lessons. And again, I noticed you're a good speaker, you presented that well. I want the evidence of your ideas and your work because you're going to get a 10, you're going to get a 10, but you're going to do it again on Monday because you can do it better than that because the evidence, what I'm using now, it's not about, I'm not picking on you, I'm not saying you're a victim, I'm not saying anything about you, I'm just saying about your activities as an academic learner because that's what school's about, schooling. Same problem, same issue. I won't go into that. What I'll do, this time is up. Oh, they're heading this way. I better move. I better get off the stage, otherwise there'll be trouble. Okay, kia ora no tātou. Thank you.
Just briefly, Professor Russell Bishop, on behalf of the Stronger Smart Institute, we want to really thank you for coming over here. In fact, I've sort of been getting kicks and to say that we should have had you on for more time, but we really acknowledge the fact your two presentations, you've certainly given us some thought-provoking, particularly around the focus of relationships being the foundation and the link into pedagogy. I thought really resonated for me, so thanks a lot.
Great. Cheers. Thank you very much. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Do you say carry on? No. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Nice to talk to you. Good luck.